that we've heard, I should say, from President Biden, who has said that he does not want any inflammation of tensions as far as the Northern Ireland Peace Accord is concerned, and you really need to keep an eye on that with Brexit. We've also heard from President Macron, he's saying nothing is negotiable. Where does that leave Britain?
I'm fine. Look, I was in the room, unlike Lisa and Andy. It was an incredibly warm bilateral meeting yesterday, which overran because they were focused on all the common values and common interests, from getting the world vaccinated to dealing with the challenge of climate change, from the traditional foreign policy geopolitical concerns from Russia to China. We did touch on, the Prime Minister and the President did touch on the Northern Ireland Protocol. And we understand the US interest in it as a long-standing guarantor of the Good Friday Agreement. And it was an opportunity for the Prime Minister to explain that we want a flexible, pragmatic approach that deals with the equities on both sides. But for that to happen, the EU must be less purist, more pragmatic and more flexible in the implementation of it. The ball is very much in the EU's court in relation to that. Frankly, we didn't linger on it. The President, the Prime Minister didn't linger on it. There were so many other things that were discussed, in particular, with the first G7 in almost 2 years, getting leaders together, dealing with the forward-looking problems and challenges of the future, from keeping trade open, from building back the economies greener, stronger, getting the world vaccinated, on which we've made a very substantial announcement today. Our big cause of getting 40 million more girls into 12 years of quality education, those were the things that dominated the conversation. Incredibly warm chemistry between the President and the Prime Minister. The meeting ran over. We're excited about the opportunities this week.
OK, lots to talk about there, but if I could just continue on with Brexit just for now. What was the tone like when they were talking about the Northern Ireland Protocol?
It's very respectful. I mean, nothing like the caricature that we see in the snippets of the media or all of that. But we understand there was a respectful conversation. The Prime Minister wanted to raise it and be very clear on our position. It is the dogmatic, purist approach that the EU has taken, which is the risk to the Good Friday Agreement. That was set out very articulately by David Trimble in an article of the Times. Of course, the Nobel Prize winning architect, or one of the architects of the Good Friday Agreement. But we want this thing to work on all sides. We understand the EU's equities, but it's got to work for all communities in Northern Ireland. And as I said, this wasn't a large part of the discussions yesterday. We moved on pretty smartly to all the other things that we're working together on, the common interests, the common values, and as I said, a very strong dynamic between the President and the Prime Minister.
President Macron is arriving in town later on today, though he's saying that nothing is negotiable as far as Brexit is concerned. We can't extend past the end of June. We have to have an agreement by then on what's happening with this border in the Irish Sea. Or can we? Can we extend past the end of June?
I think the ball's very much in the EU's court. We understand what the French have said, and that ought to focus minds in the Commission in Brussels on taking a more pragmatic, flexible approach. The Northern Ireland Protocol was always a compromise reflecting different interests, reflecting all sides and all communities in Northern Ireland, as well as the EU's own equities, and it needs to be implemented in a way which reflects and delivers for all sides. And that's the problem at the moment, that the EU has taken an overly purist approach, but we want it to work for all sides, but the change must come from the Commission's side and the way they're approaching this. And we're not negotiating or haggling the integrity of the United Kingdom, whether it's territorial, constitutional, or indeed the economic integrity of the UK. It's not up on the table for negotiating.
And before I move on, final question on that, if I can press you, can Britain extend past the end of June on trying to come up with a deal to sort out what's happening in Northern Ireland?
We take a pragmatic approach to all of these things. But as I said, the bottom line for us is that the threat and the risk to the Good Friday Agreement comes from the approach that the EU is taking, a particularly purist approach, and the principle of the Good Friday Agreement, that there's no change without the consent of the people, is something that the EU and the Northern Ireland Protocol, in the specific way that it's being approached and implementing, is putting at risk. But we're pragmatic. There's a strong well of goodwill on the UK side. We've put forward proposals. It's up to the EU now to come forward with a way that delivers win-win rather than the divisive approach we've seen recently.
Talk to me about vaccines. 100 million is what we are going to donate. We heard from Gordon Brown on the programme earlier in the week saying no one's safe until everyone is safe. Is the 100 million enough, or is it just a drop in the bucket?
So let's just take a half step back. Remember, at the start of this, we put the UK, through taxpayers' money, put £90 million into developing the AstraZeneca vaccine. Not only have we had a very successful rollout at home, but 95% of the COVAX vaccines, the global mechanism to get vaccines to the poorest and most vulnerable countries around the world, 95% of those have come from AstraZeneca. So very much part of Britain's push and internationalist approach. On top of that, we secured 1 billion doses by funding COVAX, that international mechanism. Now what we're saying is we're far enough forward with our domestic rollout that we can now make the pledge to deliver 100 million from our excess vaccine, the surplus from our vaccine rollout at home, to vaccinate the world's poorest, the international community, by the middle part of next year. We're going to do 5 million in the coming weeks and months. We will do 25 million more of those doses by the end of this calendar year and 100 million by the mid part of next year. And just to give you the strategic significance, Kay, the point is if we went on the current trajectory, the world would be vaccinated by the end of 2024. What we're doing is joining up with the US and the other G7 members, leading by example with our 100 millions, but the aim is to get the world vaccinated by the end of 2022. If we can do that, we'll be making a real step forward in dealing with the pandemic globally, which is important because we know no one's safe until everyone's safe.
Quite right, and you say that COVAX is for the world's poorest and most vulnerable, but then we learned that Canada, which is one of the G7 countries, actually took 2 million vaccines from COVAX. What's your thought on that?
We work very closely with our Canadian colleagues. I think they're one of the leading internationalist countries in the world. We have a great rapport with them, and the Prime Minister looks forward to seeing Prime Minister Trudeau. But one of the advantages of what we've done today is we've not just launched a UK initiative. What we're doing is using our convening power to get the G7 countries to say, OK, we've produced, we're going to provide this extra 100 million doses. What can we do together to make sure we get the world vaccinated by the end of 2022? That's the Prime Minister's approach. That's what Global Britain as a Force for Good is all about. And that's what we hope the G7 will achieve. And of course, I'm sure Canada will be an essential part of that.
Yeah. Has the UK taken any vaccines from COVAX?
I mean, not that I'm aware of, but as I said before, 95% of the COVAX distributed vaccines have come from AZ, which we've funded with the startup cost, the 90 million. That was, of course, a vaccine that was being made at cost, so no profit, and distributed to the world. We secured 1 billion doses. We paid for 1 billion doses, just over £500 million to provide that extra funding. And now we're providing 100 million extra doses from the surplus from our domestic rollout. So I don't think anyone can question that we are leading internationally by example.
Are you comfortable reducing the UK's commitment to overseas aid?
Look, I recognise as a temporary matter of financial emergency because of a hit that COVID had on our economy and our public finances, that we had to look at this in the round, and the savings that we've been forced to make would not just come from the domestic programmes that we've got, but the international ones. So it's something we did in sorrow, not with any relish. We'll get back to 0.7 as soon as we can. But just to make the point, we're still putting in £10 billion of aid this year. We'll be the third biggest G7 donor by proportion of gross national income. We're still, in bilateral terms, the third biggest donor to humanitarian causes around the world. So I don't think we need to be overly defensive about this. The United Kingdom, still at 0.5%, is a major force for good in the world, and that includes our ODA spend.
Foreign Secretary, there are suggestions, I read in the newspapers this morning, that there could well be a travel corridor, for want of a better way of putting it, between the UK and the US. How much credence should we be giving to that, given that you were in the room yesterday when the two leaders were speaking?
I don't think we're in a position to make a formal announcement about it, but of course we're looking at that issue with the US and with others, and as soon as we can, we want to open up. But as you know, Kay, you've heard ministers say it before, we're in this race at the moment between getting everyone second dose vaccinated in the UK and making sure that the variants don't spread, and that's the #1 priority. So we can't open up as much as we'd like until we got the clarity and the evidence to show that we've won that race. And we'll know more, of course, next week.
So we shouldn't be too excited about suggestions that there's a travel corridor between the US and the UK as yet.
Oh, we all want to do it. It was something that was discussed yesterday, and we've got an idea about how to take it forward, but it's not something we'll be announcing imminently.
OK, just before I let you go, I believe there's a barbecue on the beach tomorrow, toasting marshmallows and the like. Certainly not the weather for it today. What do you want the leaders of the G7 to take away from their experience in Cornwall?
Cornwall's beautiful. This is the first net zero G7 summit, so we're not just talking the talk, but we're walking the walk. But I think the most important thing is that countries can come together to tackle the world's problems, whether it's climate change, whether it's dealing with this awful pandemic, whether it's standing up for our values, the values that we hold dear, human rights, open trade, and also broadening the group of like-minded countries that will stand up for those values. The Prime Minister invited Prime Minister Modi, so India, South Korea, Australia, we've got the South Africans as well, and actually we need to broaden the caucus, the range of countries willing to stand up for the traditional Atlantic Charter values. And I think the choice of guests at this G7 summit, as well as the G7 leaders themselves, is very important.
Final thought before I let you go. I hear the Prime Minister went for a swim in the sea yesterday. Are you tempted at all in your Speedos today?
It's too cold for me, but you know, he's very brave and hardy, but it's a bit too nippy for me, I'm afraid, Kay.
You've got a busy few days ahead of you. We very much appreciate you taking the time to join us here on Sky News. Thank you so much. Thanks a lot.
Good to talk to you, Kay.